The prairie wind carried more than dust that evening. It carried voices, whispers soft and sing-song, threading between the cornstalks and broken fences of a quiet Kansas homestead in the fall of 1873. The breeze bent the dry grass into waves, like hands trying to smother something ancient beneath the soil. Inside a candle-lit cabin, a little girl named Ruthie sat on the wooden floor humming to herself. Her dress was patched and faded, her bare feet streaked with dirt. She rocked gently, eyes fixed on the flickering flame. Her voice, though high and sweet, echoed with a rhythm that didn't belong to childhood. 4 will ride and 3 will fall. One returns to hear the call. Blood on boots and fire in hand, they'll bring the end across the land. Her mother Esther froze mid-stitch. She looked up from her needlework, eyes wide. Ruthie, where did you hear that? Ruthie blinked slowly. Nowhere, Mama. It's just a song from my head. Esther stood, her hands trembling. You don't sing that again, you hear me? Not ever. But it's pretty, the girl said softly. It's not, Esther whispered. It's not pretty at all. A week later, a traveling preacher named Silas Boone rode into town. Weather-beaten and lean, he carried no Bible, only a tattered notebook and a fear he wore like a second skin. Folks knew him as the kind who spoke little but listened hard. When he passed the Dalton farmstead on his way to Coffeyville, he felt the air grow colder. Not in temperature, but in weight, like the wind itself was watching. That night, invited to supper by a kind family off the main road, Silas recounted a story from Missouri, a town near the Ozarks, children waking in the night, speaking in rhyme. Rhyme that matched Ruthie's word for word. It ain't coincidence, he muttered. It's a herald. I seen this before. They come after the verses start. Who comes? The farmer asked. Silas only looked at his hands. The ones it sings about. In Coffeyville, whispers had already begun. Of a widow woman named Adeline Dalton and her 4 boys, Bob, Grat, Bill, and Emmett, living far enough from town to be left alone, yet close enough to feel their presence in every shadow. They weren't yet known for violence nor for crime. Not yet. But strange things happened near their land. Tools vanished, livestock bolted. More than one neighbor complained of nightmares after passing by. And there were the children. More than Ruthie now. 3 others in town had started humming the same strange stanza, always in the twilight, always when the wind picked up. No parent had taught them, no book held the lyrics. The song was older than memory. Sheriff Danvers called it nonsense. Kids pick up all sorts of things. Songs, words, stories from drifters. It don't mean nothing. But Silas disagreed. This rhyme don't spread by mouth, it spreads by presence. The moment one child sings it, another starts. Like it's alive. A woman from Dodge City confirmed she'd heard the same verses from her sister's boy 2 months ago, before a family was found murdered near the Arkansas border, their youngest still murmuring the rhyme, even in death. By the time autumn leaves began to rot into the soil, the Dalton name was being spoken in lowered tones. Not for what they had done, but for what they had not yet done. A sense of inevitability hung in the air, thicker than the smoke from burning crops. No one dared confront them. Adeline's eyes, it was said, could make a man forget why he was angry. And the boys, well, they were just boys. Smiling, polite, working the land. But something felt wrong. Too calm, too quiet. And still, the wind whispered. 4 will ride and 3 will fall. If you're drawn to haunting tales of real American outlaws with a twist you've never heard before, hit that subscribe button and join us. Because the Dalton story you think you know, it hasn't even begun. Adeline Dalton was not a woman one questioned twice. She spoke with the calm authority of someone who had already seen what would happen and had long made peace with it. Her voice was low, almost tender, but sharp enough to draw blood. Folks said she'd come up from Louisiana after the war, a widow with 4 sons and eyes too dark for Kansas daylight. No one knew much about her husband, only that he died suddenly. Some whispered he drank himself to death. Others claimed he was found half buried in bayou mud, eyes gone white, mouth still open. Adeline never spoke of him. She rarely spoke of anything at all. The Dalton homestead stood at the edge of town, where fields gave way to thick trees. Strange symbols were etched into the doorframes. A bundle of dried herbs hung above each window. When asked about them, she simply said, "Keeps what don't belong out." Inside, her 4 sons moved like a unit. Bob, the eldest, carried the weight of leadership without complaint. Grat, always grinning, kept things light, but watched everything. Bill, the quietest, seemed more shadow than boy, and Emmett, the youngest, followed the others with eyes full of questions and fire. They obeyed their mother without hesitation, not out of fear, at least not the kind folks understood, but something deeper, like reverence, like debt. One summer evening, Sheriff Danvers rode out to speak with her, not to accuse, just to ask questions. Rumors were spreading, and as sheriff he had to show his face. He found her on the porch, snapping beans into a wooden bowl. Her expression didn't change when he dismounted. "Evening, Mrs. Dalton," he began. She nodded once. "Sheriff," he cleared his throat. "I don't mean no trouble, just, there's been talk. That rhyme, the one children been singing. Some folks say it started near here." Adeline kept snapping beans. "You think children make war songs, Sheriff?" she asked finally. "I think they repeat what they hear." She looked up then, slow and deliberate. Her eyes held his steady. "Then maybe you ought to ask who's been whispering." He shifted in his boots. "Your boys, they ever talk about strange things? Dreams, maybe?" Her lips curled slightly. "They're boys, they dream of horses and guns." "Same as any." "And you?" he asked, regretting it the moment the words left his mouth. "I dream of peace," she said, "and what must be done to keep it." Danvers left before dusk, unsettled. As he rode away, he saw Bill standing just beyond the tree line, not moving, watching. That week, a bounty hunter named Carver turned up, looking for a fugitive rumored to be hiding in the area. No one had seen the man he asked for, but Carver was persistent. He questioned every farmhand, every merchant, every drunk who would talk. When he reached the Dalton place, he rode up loud and bold. Bob answered the door. "Ain't seen no stranger," he said flatly. Carver spat. "That's so. You boys look like you'd hide your own shadow." Adeline stepped out then, wiping her hands on her apron. "You looking to find something or to lose something?" Carver stared at her. "What's that mean?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Most men who come looking don't leave with what they thought they would. The bounty hunter laughed. "Lady, I've been through worse than farm folk threats." He never made it back to town. They found his horse 3 days later, reins snapped, eyes wild. His boots were left at the Dalton gate, nothing else. People stopped asking questions after that. Something had settled into the ground around the Dalton home, something no lawman dared dig up. And still, the children's rhyme grew longer. One returns to hear the call. No one knew what the call was, but they all feared who'd be listening. The storm rolled in without thunder. No lightning, no warning, just a thick wall of cloud creeping across the prairie, swallowing the sun and drowning the land in grey silence. Inside the Dalton home, the air had grown heavy, the way it does before something irreversible. It was Emmett who found the book. He had wandered into the cellar looking for his father's old knife, the one with the chipped handle. Instead, behind a stack of crates, he found a box he didn't recognize. It was sealed with wax and wrapped in cloth. The moment his fingers touched it, a shiver climbed his spine. He didn't call for his brothers. He carried it up himself, hands trembling slightly. They gathered around the table as he unwrapped it, revealing a cracked leather journal, its pages brittle and stained. The writing inside was strange. French, maybe, but not the kind their schoolteacher taught. Symbols filled the margins, drawn in charcoal and what might have been dried blood. Bob turned a few pages and stopped. "This ain't just a book," Grat leaned in, frowning. "It's a manual." "No," Bill whispered. "It's a promise." Adeline entered without a sound. She looked at the book, then at her sons. "If you read it, you finish it. There's no halfway." They were silent. The storm pressed against the walls like something alive. She set a bowl on the table, iron, deep, dark as pitch. "If you take the oath, it binds you," to each other, to something older than your names. Once it's done, there's no turning back. Bob nodded. We already knew. Adeline met each of their eyes. Then bleed. They cut their palms, no hesitation, and let the blood drip into the bowl. One by one, the room filled with the scent of iron and soil. The journal's ink seemed to darken as the bowl filled. Then Bob spoke the words as they were written. The air shifted, the candles flickered, though there was no draught. The floor groaned like an old ship caught in wind. Somewhere in the walls, a low hum began, faint but rising like a distant chorus. Bill clenched his jaw. Feels like something's watching. No, Emmett said. Feels like something's listening. Adeline closed the book and laid a hand over it. It's done. They buried the bowl under the old oak tree behind the barn, just as the final line instructed. Before they covered the hole, Bob looked down and swore he saw the blood still swirling as if stirred by an unseen hand. That night, Emmett couldn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, his body still, but his mind racing. He saw flashes behind his eyes, images that didn't belong to him. A burning town, a man falling from a horse, a church bell ringing over broken glass. And through it all that voice, soft, feminine, melodic, repeating the rhyme. 4 will ride, and 3 will fall. He woke before dawn and found Bill already outside, shirtless, staring at the horizon. You saw it too? Emmett asked. Bill nodded once. More than once. Over breakfast, none of them spoke about what had happened. But something had changed. They moved differently, quieter, sharper. When Bob walked into town that afternoon, the butcher stepped aside without a word. That same day, the body of Lila Jennings was found downriver. She was 13, gone missing 2 days earlier. Her eyes were open, fixed on the sky. No wounds, no blood. Her mouth was slightly parted as though whispering something. Sheriff Danvers said she looked peaceful. Ruthie's mother said otherwise. She was still singing, Esther whispered, even dead. They buried Lila under the willow tree by the schoolhouse. By dusk, 3 more children had learned the new verse. Blood on boots and fire in hand. No one taught them. No one had to. Something had been awakened, and it was learning how to speak. By the time September turned to October, the rhyme was no longer a curiosity. It was a warning. In Coffeyville, people had stopped calling it a child's game. Too many children knew too many verses they couldn't explain. Too many dreams were ending in cold sweats, always with the same sound, a low chant, almost sung, always beginning with 4 will ride. Elder townsfolk met behind closed doors. Ministers and teachers, farmers and merchants, they didn't talk about crops or cattle. They talked about the Dalton boys. They haven't done anything, someone always said. But they will, someone always replied. The town school teacher, Miss Evelyn Harper, had kept a journal since the first day Ruthie spoke the verse. By now, it was nearly full. She tracked which children heard the rhyme first, who repeated it, and how it changed. The changes always came after something dark. A missing animal, a barn fire, a sudden death. Last week, she caught a boy scribbling the rhyme onto the chalkboard during recess, not knowing how he got the chalk or when he'd started. She asked him gently, "Where did you learn that?" He looked her in the eye and said, "From the girl in the mirror." The same night, Evelyn dreamt of riding with 4 silhouettes down a dirt road lit only by fire. When she woke, ash coated her windowsill. Preacher Boone returned to Coffeyville in secret. He met with 3 of the town elders in the back room of the church, carrying pages torn from old hymnals, crossed out with notes in Latin and Creole. "The rhyme's structure is ancient," he said, "older than English, older than this land. It doesn't just predict, it prepares." "Prepares what?" one asked. "Not what. Who?" He refused to name the Daltons directly. Superstition, maybe, or fear. But when asked what should be done, he only said, "Keep the children away from their land, and do not, under any condition, let them sing." Easier said than done, because even the adults began hearing it. At the general store, an old man named Tobias muttered it in his sleep, and when he woke he was missing 3 teeth, though his mouth showed no injury. A midwife near Verdigris River claimed she heard it echoing from her own unborn child. And a prospector who passed through town, rough and loud, fled in the middle of the night, barefoot and crying, claiming he saw the verse tattooed on his chest in bruises. Still, the sheriff refused to act. "We don't lock folks up for spooky rhymes," he told the mayor. "If the Daltons break a law, I'll handle it, but until then I won't start a witch hunt." Others weren't so patient. Boone, always cautious, made one more quiet trip to the Dalton homestead. He stood at the edge of their land and prayed out loud in Latin, arms raised to the sky. Minutes passed. Then Bob stepped from the barn, holding a lantern. "You ought to go, preacher," he said calmly. Boone looked at him, voice steady. "You don't have to be this." Bob tilted his head. "Don't you believe in destiny?" "I believe in mercy." "So do I," Bob said. "But mercy's for the ones who listen. You came here speaking words that don't belong. Now they know your name." Boone left. He didn't return. His horse was found a week later, grazing near the schoolyard. His saddle was empty. His journal, burned, was discovered in the churchyard, with the rhyme scorched into the grass around it. By Halloween, the rhyme had grown another verse. "Ash will fall and silence break, one shall burn for four's mistake." And now, even the skeptics began to murmur, what if the verse wasn't about what the Daltons would do? What if it was about what no one could stop? The Daltons didn't begin as outlaws. Not exactly. They told themselves they were protectors, guardians of land, of family, of something older than law. But lines blurred when the world refused to listen. When railroads bought out family farms, when judges answered to money, not truth, when the people who whispered verses about them began to look at them like they were already gone. So the brothers formed a crew. It started with neighbors, men tired of taxes and threats, men who had nothing left to lose. Then came a few riders from down south, outcasts with quiet eyes who claimed they'd heard the rhyme too. By winter, the Daltons were leading a silent army, not in battle but in belief. They called themselves the Bound, bound by blood, by oath, by prophecy. Bob was the center. He spoke little, acted quick, and never explained his choices. Great handled the charm. He'd smile while taking a man's weapon apart in front of him. Bill lingered in the shadows, always watching, never far. And Emmett had become something else entirely. His stare unsettled even the roughest men. He heard things before they were spoken. Their first target wasn't a bank, but a rail supply outpost. A warehouse storing dynamite, iron, rifles, all intended for expansion into the Oklahoma Territory. They didn't kill anyone. They didn't need to. They moved like smoke, quiet and exact. By dawn, the depot was ash and dust. No witnesses, no survivors, only the fire. Then came the message, carved into a wooden beam that didn't burn. "Ash will fall and silence break." The sheriff blamed bandits. The railroad blamed sabotage. The Bound said nothing. But those who joined the Daltons that night walked taller, like they'd been chosen. Soon after, a merchant caravan vanished near the Verdigris River. Not a single body found, just empty wagons, every horse dead from fright, eyes wide, tongues bitten through. In the mud nearby, someone found a child's doll sitting upright, its dress stitched with unfamiliar symbols. Only the Daltons knew what the symbols meant. They never spoke of it. Bob gathered the Bound in the barn one evening. Candles flickered across their faces. He spoke not of war but of fate. "We didn't choose this path," he said. "It chose us. We're not thieves. We're not killers. We're the echo." "Echo of what?" someone asked. Bob looked to the rafters. "Of what happens when no one listens." The group fell silent. Grot broke it with a grin. "And if someone tries to listen now?" "Too late," Bill murmured. They already heard. Emmett stood at the doorway, breathing hard. He wasn't blinking. "They're coming," he said. Everyone turned. "Who?" Bob asked. Emmett's voice cracked like dry bark. "The ones who whisper." That night, 3 more members of the Bound vanished. No signs, no blood, just their boots, left neatly side by side at the edge of the Dalton farm, and above them, etched into a stone, a verse none of them had heard before. 3 were called but did not bind. Now they walk with none behind. Bob read it, jaw clenched. Grat laughed without humor. Bill touched the stone and recoiled like it burned. They warned us, Emmett whispered. Even our silence has a cost. Still the movement grew. By spring, towns across Kansas whispered of the bound, of riders who came at night, took nothing, harmed no one, but left behind ashes and rime. The law had no proof. The people had no trust. And the rhyme kept growing, alive, evolving as if it knew who would hear it next. Inside the Dalton home, Adeline watched her sons return, faces cold, eyes hollowed by belief. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. They were no longer boys. They were the words made flesh. The rhyme was never written, not on paper, not in songbooks, not even in whispered letters between towns. It moved like wind over wheat, unseen, unstoppable, bending everything in its path. From Kansas it spread outward, a quiet fire beneath the surface of Missouri, Arkansas, and Texas. No one carried it. It carried itself. Children sang it first, always the children, alone mostly. In barns, near wells, under beds, they sang to themselves, soft and slow, not knowing what the words meant. Then others began hearing it, not just in voices, but in dreams, in ringing ears, in the silence between conversations. 4 will ride and 3 will fall. It arrived in Fort Smith, when a little girl named Clara began sketching faces into her schoolbook margins, men with hats and rifles. One had a blood-stained coat. She didn't know who they were, but she gave them names: Bob, Great, Bill, and Emmett. When her teacher asked where she heard those names, Clara blinked. They told me. In Pine Bluff, a boy carved verses into his desk with a pocket knife. Each line appeared in his handwriting, though he swore he never wrote them. The headmaster beat him for it. That night, the schoolhouse burned to the ground. The only thing untouched was the desk. The verse was still there. They ride at dusk with fire eyes, no man hears their last goodbyes. In San Angelo, a barber dropped dead mid-shave after humming the rhyme under his breath. His last word? Emmett. The rhyme did not spare city or farm, black or white, poor or powerful. It spread in defiance of distance and disbelief. Librarians began reporting pages missing, not torn, just gone, from books on folklore and colonial rituals. A minister in Little Rock attempted to recite the Lord's Prayer at a funeral, but instead found himself speaking the first stanza of the Dalton rhyme. His congregation fled the church in panic. In a small town near the Red River, a group of orphans began chanting the verse in perfect unison during supper, none of them knowing how to read or write. The matron locked them in their dormitory. By morning she was gone, and every child had the same scar on their left palm, a crescent like a half-closed eye. Scholars took notice, folklorists, skeptics, spiritualists. One by one they tried to explain it. Mass hysteria, shared trauma, psychosomatic contagion. But their words couldn't erase the rhyme once they heard it. A few even added to it, unintentionally. A professor from St. Louis scribbled a new couplet into his journal, half asleep, after dreaming of the Dalton brothers riding through smoke. When he woke, the ink was dry and his hands were clean, but the words were unfamiliar. One will kneel and beg for name, one will burn to cleanse the flame. When he tried to publish it, the presses jammed. 4 times. The 5th attempt succeeded. He mailed the article. It never arrived. In Wichita, a woman burned a bundle of birch bark with strange markings found by her son. The flames turned green. Her house collapsed that evening during clear weather. No one could stop it, not by silence, not by fire, not by forgetting. Back in Coffeyville, Evelyn Harper continued her journal. She recorded a pattern. The more the rhyme spread, the closer the Dalton name returned to every conversation. It wasn't just legend now, it was tethered to the rhythm. Some believed the rhyme had become a kind of prayer, others a curse. But the effect was the same. The towns it touched fell quieter. People looked over shoulders. Doors were bolted before sunset. And children, always the children, kept humming. New stanzas, new names. Adeline Dalton sat on her porch, eyes closed, rocking slowly. She could feel it, like a storm waiting just beyond the tree line. The air smelled different now, earthy, metallic. She whispered, "They've started listening." And from the barn, Bob answered without turning, "No, they've started remembering." Bob Dalton began waking up in places he didn't remember walking to. Once by the river, hands wet and muddy. Another time deep in the woods, blood on his boots but no wound on his body. He stopped asking questions. The answers didn't matter anymore. The voice in his head, soft, low, always female, whispered instructions like prayers. He followed them. At first he thought it was madness, but the things she said came true. Take the path where cotton never grew. He did, and avoided a sheriff's ambush. Turn away from the mirror at dusk. He obeyed, and didn't see what was staring back. Bob stopped speaking of it. Some truths sound like lies until they come for you. Great noticed the change, but said nothing. Instead he laughed more loudly, told longer stories, drank deeper, and never looked anyone in the eye for more than a second. At night, he carved symbols into his bedpost. By morning, he never remembered doing it. Bill became distant, not angry, not cold, just separate. Like he'd stepped one pace outside the world everyone else walked in. Sometimes he'd stare into the wind and whisper names no one recognized. He wrote in a small black book. The pages remained blank. Emmett changed the most. He no longer slept. His dreams walked with him. He saw figures move in mirrors even when the room was still. He heard bells that no one else heard, single chimes soft and deep, always just before someone died. His hands stayed warm, even in winter, and animals refused to come near him. One morning he stepped outside the house barefoot. Frost covered the ground, but he didn't flinch. He walked into the field and knelt, digging with his fingers until he struck wood. A box. Inside, a locket. Inside the locket, a lock of red hair. He showed it to Adeline. She took it, closed it, and buried it again. "You were never meant to find that," she said. "But I had to," he answered. That same week they arrived in Dodge City, not for a job, not for supplies. The Bound had business there, something unspoken. Bob never explained. They moved through the streets like smoke, silent, purposeful. No one remembered how many there were, only that they came after sundown. A blind woman sat outside the saloon humming. She didn't beg, didn't speak, just hummed. When the Daltons passed her, she opened her mouth and sang, "Three shall ride beneath the bell. One shall see and none shall tell." They froze. Bob stepped forward, voice quiet. "How do you know that?" The woman smiled, milky eyes fixed on a world beyond them. "You don't remember," she said, "but you will." That night, Emmett woke in a cold sweat. He walked into the street alone, whispering the final line the woman had sung. The wind answered back, not with words but with form. Shadows moved in the dust, not men, not beasts, shapes that followed even when he turned. When he ran, when he screamed, Bob found him at dawn, curled beneath the church steps. Emmett looked up, voice hollow. "They're not coming for us," he said. Bob frowned. "Then who?" Emmett closed his eyes. Everyone else. From that moment, the Bound stopped riding in daylight. They traveled only by night, disappearing at the first sign of sun. Their faces changed, hardened. Not from guilt or fear, but from knowing they were no longer making choices. They were fulfilling instructions. And still, the rhyme grew. People in towns they'd never visited sang verses about things the Daltons hadn't yet done. Towns that had never seen them burned candles at crossroads, hung charms in windows, left offerings in wells. The rhyme had taken root. It no longer needed origin. It needed witness. And the Daltons were becoming its shadow. It began with names, whispered by wind, scratched into glass, murmured by the dying. Names the rhyme had already spoken, though the events tied to them had not yet occurred. Marshall Peterson in Winfield, dead from a fall down his own stairs. Witnesses said he cried out just before he slipped, but not for help. He said a name, Grat, a store clerk in El Reno struck by lightning under a clear sky. The last receipt he wrote bore the initials E.D., Emmett Dalton. He had no reason to write them. A saloon singer in Topeka collapsed mid-song. Her final words were, "The one who returns," a phrase pulled from a verse only spoken by children in 2 other counties. It was as if the rhyme knew what would happen before it did. But worse, it was as if the rhyme caused it. Great stopped laughing altogether. He grew quiet, jittery, started checking doors twice, slept with his rifle in hand. He told Bob, "Someone's watching." "We're always being watched," Bob replied. "No," Grat whispered, "not people. Something else." Their most trusted bound member, Josiah, turned on them, said the rhyme was a curse, said it had to be buried, forgotten, destroyed. He was found 2 days later with his mouth sewn shut, eyes wide, heart burst from the inside. No blood, just a line carved into his chest. "Those who turn shall choke on breath, for silence is the cruelest death." Bill didn't speak for a week after seeing it. He began collecting bird bones, laying them in patterns outside their camp. When asked why, he said, "They remember the sky." Emmett stopped eating, claimed the food turned to ash in his mouth. Adeline tried to feed him herself, her hands trembling for the first time in years, but when she looked into his eyes, she stepped back. "That's not hunger," she whispered. "That's waiting." Bob, ever the leader, grew distant, not cold, just quiet. He took long rides alone, stopped answering questions, and carried the ritual book with him wherever he went. It no longer looked like leather, more like skin. Still, they pressed on. Robberies continued, not for gold, not for fame, but for reasons even they didn't fully grasp. Each heist matched a verse. Each verse gained a line after it happened. "When 3 run red and 2 shall cry, 1 shall watch the others die." The townsfolk no longer asked why. They boarded up windows, left offerings at crossroads, whispered apologies to the wind. They called it the Dalton prophecy. Some carved the verses into church pews. Others drowned themselves before their name could appear in it. What began as myth had become map. Every verse corresponded to someone real, every victim marked by fate, not choice. At night, Bob sat alone, reading the book aloud to no one. He turned the pages slower each time, like he feared what came next, like he knew it would happen no matter how fast or slow he read. One morning, Grat said, "You think we can stop it?" Bob looked up, eyes hollow. "No," he said, "but we can finish it." The line chilled even Emmett. In distant towns, children sang verses that hadn't been written. Teachers heard unfamiliar stanzas from students too young to speak. Graves were dug before deaths. Names were chiseled into headstones before breath was gone. The rhyme no longer predicted, it confirmed. And every new verse felt like a countdown, not to the Daltons' end, but to something worse, something waiting beyond the last line. It wasn't lawmen who came first, it was bells, soft at first, always just before dawn. One ring far off, then another closer. No church claimed them, no man pulled their rope. The sound seemed to fold into the air like thunder echoing through dreams. It was never loud, but everyone heard it, especially the bound. Bob began waking just before each chime. He'd sit up, pulse steady, eyes open. Sometimes he'd whisper the next line of the rhyme before it had even been heard. Emmett stopped speaking altogether. He'd move his lips in silence whenever the bells rang, mouthing words no one else could hear. Adeline watched from her porch, hands trembling as she counted the tolls. Always 7, then 6, then 5. They were getting closer. The Pinkertons followed behind, agents trained to kill, to track, to break men like the Daltons, but none of them expected what they were walking into. The first 3 who approached the Dalton homestead vanished. Their horses returned alone, covered in welts. The saddle of one bore the imprint of a hand, too large to be human. The next group came with torches and iron. They reached the barn and never left. One of them, Agent Willoughby, was found days later, naked and babbling beside a river, teeth shattered, tongue cut. "They know their names," he kept repeating. "They know before we do." Back in town, fear shifted. People stopped siding with the law. They started avoiding it altogether. What use was order against something that knew the future? The rhyme had become a ritual. Each time it grew, it marked another fall. Now it predicted even the living. The rider comes with eyes of flame and speaks the death before the name. Bob no longer gave orders. He didn't need to. The bound moved by instinct now, shadows drawn to flame. They no longer rode for profit. They rode to fulfill. Great's hands began shaking. He tried to hide it, but Bill noticed. "You feel it too," he said. Grat didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the hills, eyes wide. "They're watching us from under the ground." "No," Bill whispered. "They're listening from above." One of the bound, a boy named Caleb, panicked. He tried to run, got as far as the creek before the sky opened and the rain turned red. He was found kneeling in the mud, eyes gone, mouth sewn shut like Josiah's. On his back was a new verse. "Run from oath and fall to stone, bound by silence, die alone." The message was clear. There was no leaving, and the rhyme was still growing. Each new line arrived with a bell toll. Each death confirmed what the verse already said. No one understood how it worked. No one dared challenge it. Even Adeline stayed silent now, face pale, her rocking chair still for the first time in years. Then came the dream. All of them had it. The brothers. The bound. Even those who'd heard the rhyme only once. A town, a street, a bank, gunfire, bodies. And the final line spoken not by voice but by time itself. "The end begins in Coffeeville." Bob woke first, sat up, lit a candle. He turned to Emmett. "It's time." Emmett nodded, eyes black with knowing. Far away a bell rang once. The Dalton prophecy wasn't a warning anymore. It was an announcement. And the sound it brought wasn't just death. It was the certainty of it. October 5th, 1892. The day Coffeeville held its breath. It was a town pretending to be asleep. Shops closed early, streets swept clean, children kept indoors, prayers whispered between shuttered windows. Men loaded rifles behind counters. Women filled lamps, waiting for the sun to vanish. Everyone knew. They were coming. Not because someone had seen them, because the rhyme said so. "Four shall ride at morning's breath, to walk the fire's edge of death." Evelyn Harper heard the children singing it again before class. The melody was softer than ever. Their voices didn't carry joy, only finality. "Where did you hear that?" she asked a little boy named Thomas. He looked up at her with eyes far too old. "We always knew." Far from town, the Dalton brothers prepared. They said nothing, just saddled their horses, loaded their rifles, and tightened their gloves. Bob adjusted his collar. "We walk in quiet, straight, no rush, no fear." Grat chuckled under his breath. "Never thought I'd dress for my own eulogy." Bill checked his pistol twice. "Think it'll be clean?" Bob shook his head. "It'll be written." Emmett mounted last. He had the look of someone already elsewhere. The others didn't ask where. They rode toward Coffeeville just as the sun cracked the horizon. Light split the fog like a wound. The wind, unusually still, carried only silence. Not a bird sang, not a dog barked. Even the earth seemed to wait. When they reached town limits, it was as if time slowed. Townsfolk watched from behind curtains. Every breath held. The Dalton gang split. 2 to the Condon Bank, 2 to the First National. They moved like men on a stage. Every step known, every second measured. No hesitation, no confusion. It had already been decided. Inside the bank's clerks trembled. One dropped his pen and sobbed. Another whispered the final line of the prophecy before the first shot was fired. Outside, the trap closed. Townsmen stepped from alleys, from rooftops, from cellar doors, shotguns, rifles, pistols, eyes full of something between duty and dread. They weren't lawmen, they were fathers, sons, neighbors. They opened fire. The first bullet hit Great, square in the chest. He stumbled back, laughed once, then collapsed with his eyes still open. Bill didn't make it past the door. Shot twice in the back, he fell into the street like a dropped rag. Bob kept moving, fired twice, then 3 more times, took a hit in the shoulder, then the leg. He crawled toward cover but never made it. The second volley tore through him. Emmett was the last to fall. He turned as the shooting slowed, blood soaking his coat. He didn't shoot back. He just stared, eyes wide, lips moving without sound. Then he dropped to his knees. A boy, no older than 12, stood behind a barrel nearby, watching it all. He began to hum. No melody, just rhythm, slow and low. His mother screamed and pulled him away. The smoke cleared. The dead were counted. 4 Daltons rode in. 3 were left behind. 1, barely breathing, would return, just as the rhyme had promised. By dusk, the bodies were laid side by side. Townsfolk circled them, hats in hand, eyes lowered. No one spoke. No one cheered. Because deep down, no one believed they'd truly won. Evelyn Harper approached Emmett's unconscious form before the doctor dragged her back. She looked down at him and whispered the newest verse, one that hadn't been heard until that very moment. When guns fall still and dust has laid, one shall rise though all have paid. The town rang its church bell once, just once, and the children, already gathered at the edge of the schoolyard, sang the refrain again, soft, gentle, inevitable. 4 will ride and 3 will fall. In the distance, the wind carried it on, past the fields, past the hills, beyond Coffeeville, because the rhyme didn't end that day. It began. Emmett Dalton's eyes opened 3 days after the gunfire stopped. The room was white, quiet. He couldn't feel his legs. Voices drifted from somewhere outside the walls, but none called his name. He blinked slowly, tasting ash. A nurse sat beside him, still and pale. "Where am I?" he asked, though the question felt hollow. "Between," she said. For a moment he believed her. He didn't remember the pain, only the falling, the flash, the sound of a bell, then silence. But when he closed his eyes, it all returned, on loop, great falling with a smile, Bill hitting the dust without a sound, Bob crawling toward him, mouth moving, no words coming, the bullets tearing the air, the rhythm of death and the rhyme, always the rhyme. Each night after, the dreams grew sharper. He'd relive the final ride again and again. Each time it changed, just slightly. A different path, a delayed shot, a scream that came too soon. But the ending never wavered. They always died. 3 always fell. He always lived, not by mercy, but by design. Emmett began speaking the verses in his sleep. Guards reported hearing him whisper lines that hadn't yet entered the public's memory, lines that would later appear in distant towns, on gravestones, in children's songs. He who sees and walks alone shall wear the fate that's not his own. He asked for a pen. They gave him paper. He didn't write a confession. He didn't beg forgiveness. He wrote verses. Every page began with a rhyme. Every line filled itself. He swore he didn't know how it happened. The guards burned the pages. Still, the rhyme continued. At trial, Emmett said little. He looked straight ahead, pale, hollow, nodding only when asked if he remembered what happened. "I remember everything," he said. "Do you feel remorse?" He paused. Then, "I feel rhythm." They sentenced him to life. And still, the bells rang. Others began dreaming too. Men on the jury, a reporter in the back row, a woman who watched through the window and swore she heard a child whisper the final stanza in reverse. In prison, Emmett didn't age the way others did. He stayed sharp, calm. He never fought, never raised his voice. He just listened. One night he awoke to the sound of boots. His cell was locked, he was alone. Still he heard them, 3 sets, walking in unison, stopping just outside the bars. He didn't call for help. He didn't move. He whispered the last line he'd written. The ride repeats, the dust returns, the dead still breathe while justice burns. The footsteps faded, but the rhyme remained. They moved him after that, isolated. No books, no visitors. Yet the guards swore they heard voices inside. 4 men, always 4, talking, laughing, sometimes weeping. One guard quit after a single shift. "I heard the shooting," he said, "but it was backward." Years passed, the world forgot. But in dark corners of Kansas, children still hummed the tune. And when they reached the final line, they'd pause, like waiting for someone else to finish it, like someone always did. On his 31st birthday behind bars, Emmett sat in silence. A priest offered him prayer. Emmett asked for quiet. "God already heard me," he said. So did the others. The priest didn't ask who. He didn't want to know. That night, Emmett dreamed again. Same road, same horses. Same ride, but this time he saw something new. A mirror, cracked and stained with dust. In it, 4 boys rode out, faces young again. But their eyes weren't theirs. They were watching him, and as the dream ended, he whispered something no one else could explain. They never stopped. Years passed. Emmett Dalton remained behind bars while the world moved on, or at least pretended to. New presidents rose, wars were fought, Coffeyville rebuilt and cleaned its streets. Tourists came to see where the gang fell, where justice had triumphed. But in corners too quiet, in counties too small to draw attention, the rhyme continued. Children still sang. In Oklahoma, a teacher reported hearing the chorus drift from an empty classroom. In Missouri, a pastor dreamed of 4 riders dragging coffins behind them, only to wake with scratches on his chest, shaped like the old Dalton sigil. And in Kansas, a newborn baby mumbled its first words before breath, the first line of the rhyme. 4 will ride. Back in prison, Emmett watched the walls, every crack, every shadow. He barely slept now. He didn't need to. His dreams had begun spilling into the waking world. The rhyme never left him. It fed itself on time. One morning, the warden entered his cell, pale and shaking. "You been writing?" Emmett blinked slowly. Not with hands. They'd found markings on the wall, not scratched, not drawn, formed. Letters embedded in the stone like veins, verses, new ones. One read, "The one who lives but does not flee shall bear the mark of memory." The guards began refusing to stand near him. One quit after claiming he heard his dead brother weeping from Emmett's cell. Another swore he saw blood leak from the keyhole. Visitors stopped coming. Letters went unanswered. Still, Emmett waited. Because he knew the rhyme wasn't finished. He wasn't its end. He was its pause. On the 13th year of his sentence, Emmett stopped speaking altogether. He'd begun carving shapes into his bedpost, circles, chains, crescent eyes. Every 7 days he would stand and whisper into the air. Where are they now? No one knew who he meant, until the dreams returned. Reports spread across towns once silenced. The same dream, always the same. Riders through fire, bells. A face looking back in the mirror that wasn't your own, and in every case someone died within a week. It was never direct, never violent. One woman drowned in her well, though there was no water. A man suffocated in a wheat field under open sky. A child vanished during church, leaving only a verse written in soot beneath the pulpit. Ash shall speak when breath runs dry, and from the grave the bound shall cry. Folklorists returned to the case. They traced maps, connected towns, compared verses. One detail stopped them cold. None of the rhymes ever repeated. Each line was unique, tied to its victim, as if each death earned its own stanza. One scholar, desperate for answers, wrote to Emmett. He received a blank page. Until midnight, when the ink appeared. "You don't write it, it writes you." Emmett's own body began changing. Hair thinned, fingers darkened at the tips, his eyes dulled, but he never lost focus. Nurses claimed his breath stopped once for 5 minutes, then returned. He spoke then only one word, again. What no one could explain was how the rhyme kept appearing across states he'd never left. On barns, on chalkboards, inside Bibles. Blood was used once. A mother found her child asleep with a line etched in red across his back. "He who runs from names once heard shall fall to hands without a word." That same week, Emmett collapsed, not dead, but still. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't eat. They declared him catatonic, locked the cell, left him to time. But 3 days later, new verses appeared on the ceiling above his bed, written in the same hand that had never held a pen. By the 1950s, most folks had forgotten the rhyme, or thought they had. Coffeyville built new homes, paved roads, installed streetlights. Children played baseball where the Daltons once bled. Their story became local legend, a tourist tale told with a wink. 4 fools tried to rob 2 banks at once. People laughed, but the wind didn't forget, and neither did the children. In a school outside Tulsa, a girl named Elsie Dalton stood up during morning prayer and began to hum. Her voice was low, steady, strangely precise. The words followed, too old for her to know, too exact to dismiss. One shall dream and name shall pass, from blood to blood, through smoke and glass. The teacher slapped her. Elsie didn't flinch. She sat down, smiling. When her parents were called, her mother broke into tears. Not because of fear, but recognition. She'd sung the same rhyme when she was a child, and her mother before her, but no one ever remembered teaching it. Elsie's grandfather, a war veteran and railroad worker, had once kept a box of old papers and relics under his floorboards. After the incident, he opened it again. Inside, a photo of Emmett Dalton, newspaper clippings, and a handwritten verse. He who stands while others fall shall carry fate inside the wall. He burned it that night. But the next morning, every mirror in the house cracked. By then, a young folklorist named Harold Greaves was investigating anomalies across the Midwest, odd chants, forgotten names, and recurring patterns in rural oral traditions. He wasn't chasing ghosts. He believed in cultural echoes, not curses, until he heard the rhyme. It came from a child at a rest stop outside Wichita, a boy no older than 5, alone, swinging his legs, singing softly. Harold asked him where he learned the song. The boy smiled and said, "In your dream." That night Harold dreamed of 4 riders with burning eyes and no mouths. When he awoke, his notebook was filled with a verse he hadn't written. "Speak their names and call the flame. What dies in time returns the same." His hands smelled of ash. Determined, he followed the trail, interviewing families, teachers, elders. In every case, the rhyme appeared in households with even the faintest blood tie to the Daltons. Cousins, great-nieces, bastards long denied. Even those who changed their names couldn't escape it. One girl in Nebraska, adopted at birth, began sleepwalking at 7. She spoke in full rhyme, backwards. Her adoptive mother traced the girl's lineage back to Adeline Dalton's youngest sister. Harold compiled the data, dozens of cases, all connected by blood. He called it the Dalton chain. No one published it. Every press he sent it to returned the envelope, unopened. One editor claimed the typewritten letters rearranged themselves when he looked away. Another died in a house fire the day after reading it. So Harold turned to oral history. He recorded voices, verses, warnings. In one interview, an old woman named Clara, age 94, recited the entire rhyme from memory, start to end, including stanzas Harold had never encountered. When asked how she knew it, she replied, "My brother sang it the night he died." Said the wind taught it to him. He checked her family line. Her grandmother was born Dalton, even after prison, even after Emmett's death. If he ever truly died, the rhyme lived. But now it didn't just speak of the past. It named the living, named them before they made choices, before they fell. Each generation gained a line, and the rhyme no longer warned, it instructed. Raymond Dalton never knew the weight of his name until the night he dreamed in rhyme. It was 1968. The war had come calling. He was 19, preparing for deployment to Vietnam. A quiet boy, respectful, raised Methodist. He didn't drink, didn't fight, didn't believe in ghosts. Then the dreams began. He was riding, always riding, through fields of fire. The faces beside him were familiar, men from old family photos, but younger. Emmett, Bob, Great, Bill. They never looked at him. They just rode. And ahead, always, a child humming. When he awoke, he was sweating, heart pounding. A voice whispered in his ear, not from the dream, but from the room itself. "Go to the attic." He obeyed. The old house had belonged to his grandmother, who'd passed the year before. Raymond had never ventured beyond the 2nd floor. But now, drawn by something he couldn't name, he climbed the narrow stairs and pulled open the hatch. Dust choked the air. But beneath a loose floorboard he found a box. Inside, a locket, a page from a hymn book, and a small leather-bound journal. The same one Emmett had kept in prison, though Raymond had no way of knowing that. He opened it, blank at first, then words began to bleed onto the page. When blood returns and name is spoken, the chain resumes what was not broken. Raymond froze. The verse felt like something entering him, not being read, being remembered. The next day he visited his great-aunt, the only surviving Dalton on record. She refused to let him in, spoke through the screen door. "You found the book," he nodded. "I told your father to burn that house." "Why didn't he?" She closed her eyes. "Because he thought the curse ended with Emmett. But it didn't." "No," she said. "It rewrote itself." Raymond demanded answers. She gave him what little she dared. The rhyme, she said, wasn't a prophecy. It was a spell, a containment, forged in blood, passed through kin. The brothers had made a pact with something older than Scripture, and when one survived, the binding failed. It needed 4 deaths. It got 3. Emmett's survival left the spell hungry, incomplete. "So now it waits," she said, "for the name." "For you." Raymond left in silence. That night he read more of the journal. It spoke of symbols, locations, names, but above all, one truth repeated. You do not carry the curse, you complete it. The next day, he boarded a bus for Tulsa. Along the way, he passed towns that felt familiar, streets he'd never walked, trees that bent as if they recognized him. And in the distance he heard children playing, singing. 4 will ride and 3 will fall. It wasn't just memory, it was movement. Something was shifting. In Tulsa, Raymond visited the site of the old Coffeyville courthouse. There, beneath a tree, he buried the journal, not to hide it, to fulfill it. He cut his palm, let blood soak into the soil and whispered, "I break it." The ground did not shake, the sky did not change, but something settled. The voices fell silent. For the first time since he could remember, Raymond slept through the night. But when he returned home, a new page had appeared inside his duffel bag, not written by his hand, not in Emmett's, in ink still wet. One shall bind where 4 have bled, the name endures when verse is read. Raymond stared at the line and realized the rhyme had not been broken, only rewritten. Decades passed, names faded, but the rhyme never did. It lingered in corners of the world no map could mark, on cracked porches, in children's sleep, in the hum of engines late at night. It waited, not to be heard, but to be repeated. Because that was always its purpose. In 1991, a podcaster named Alan Reese began a series called Forgotten Verses, a deep dive into rural American folklore. He collected obscure chants, lost lullabies, regional myths. He wasn't chasing fame, just truth. When he stumbled across the Dalton rhyme, he thought he'd found gold. The lines were elegant, ominous, rich with poetic cadence. He played a crude recording of a child in Arkansas reciting the oldest known stanza, 4 will ride and 3 will fall. The views skyrocketed. Listeners emailed with stories. Their grandparents knew the lines. Their kids hummed the melody. One man claimed to have written it in his sleep before ever hearing the show. Alan thought it was viral myth, psychological contagion. He laughed on air, called it ghostly graffiti. Then the dreams began. He saw men on horseback riding through a fireless landscape. Bells rang, not in his ears, but behind his eyes. Each time he woke, there was a new verse scribbled in his notebook. Lines he didn't remember writing. One morning he read the latest one on his show. One shall speak and none shall leave. When verse is heard, the blood shall weave. That was his last upload. Listeners reported static halfway through. A child's voice interrupted. Some said it whispered, others said it screamed. The file corrupted. Alan disappeared 3 days later. Authorities found no sign of struggle. Only a mirror cracked down the middle and the same line etched into the glass. The name endures when verse is read. Now, in playgrounds across the Midwest, children whisper something that adults pretend not to hear. It's not a song, it's not a game. It's memory pretending to be melody. One little girl, when asked who taught her the rhyme, smiled and said, "It taught itself." Another drew 4 figures in charcoal, all shadows, all facing away. Beneath them, she wrote a single word: again. The Dalton story never needed pages. It never belonged to books or bullets. It lived in mouths, in breath, passed from voice to voice, from blood to blood. And the rhyme, it lives still. Changing, adapting, waiting. You may forget the names, but you'll remember the sound. So if you ever hear a child hum something you can't place, if you wake with ashes on your sheets, if you see 4 silhouettes in a dream, don't speak, don't repeat. And whatever you do, don't finish the verse. If this tale pulled you into the shadow of history and left you wondering how much of legend is memory disguised, make sure to subscribe for more stories that dig deeper than the surface. And before you go, click on the next video on your screen, because what waits in the next story might be even darker than the Dalton rhyme.